Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Two WBA belt holders, Manuel Charr and Trevor Bryan, are set to face each other on January the 29th. It has been confirmed. So see here on screen, so this is the, I guess you'd call it the press release. It's on Don King's website, but effectively it's actually just a bout sheet. But above it, a headline saying, "Get ready for Don King Championship Fight Night, January 29th. Doesn't even have the fighters listed in the headline there, so interesting. I guess King, a bit of an egomaniac, but the line ahead of the bout sheet says, "Don King is presenting yet another great night of championship bouts. Check back often for more information as additional bouts are announced." So the bout sheet so far, 3 fights. 2 of them are heavyweight fights. The second of the 2 fights is actually, it's interesting to me at least, because you've got Christopher Lovejoy, who's effectively, conned our way into the boxing sort of fans, I don't want to say hearts, but consciousness to some degree, coming from effectively facing Neville Nobodies down in Mexico, and then almost facing Dave Allen, but then this whole sort of thing with his contract with Don King popped up. He didn't face Dave Allen. Lovejoy, he will be facing the former WBC champion, Bermane Stiverne. Stiverne currently, 42 years old. So Stiverne and Lovejoy. That's an interesting fight to me, and I'll come to that a bit later on. And actually, I make Bermane Stiverne a favourite. But to the main event. So Mahmoud Charr, a.k.a. Manuel Charr, he's now going by Mahmoud Charr, facing Trevor Bryan. So Charr, the regular title holder, and then you have Trevor Bryan, who is the interim champion. So this is quite interesting because they've tried to make this fight for more than 2 years now. There's been a whole myriad of reasons why it hasn't happened. Back in 2019, it was meant to happen, but for whatever reason, it just fell apart. It was going to be held in the Congo, just never happened. No real explanation about what happened, just went quiet. Everyone sort of moved on, and then there was other fights that were talked about. Almost happened last year in 2020. A purse bid was even held, but then the pandemic hit. So things were sort of iced, and then there was discussion about Trevor Bryan. He may be facing Christopher Lovejoy later in the year, but for whatever reason, that fight didn't happen as well. But now we're full circle. So over the course of 2 years, they've tried to make this fight a number of times, and now it's going to happen. The WBA actually did get involved at the end of 2020 and said, look, this fight between the regular title holder Charr and the interim title holder Bryan, it is going to happen. Look, what we're going to do is the purse bid that you did have is going to be carried forward. And just to catch you up on that, because some of these details do slip from the consciousness over time, because we're talking about significant periods of time here. Bearing in mind, and this is sort of a stat that will maybe slightly astound, but maybe not really surprise, given it is the WBA and these fighters here are pretty inactive, but Charr, Bryan, Stiverne and Lovejoy collectively heading into this fight have not been in the ring for almost 9 years. When you add it up collectively, almost 9 years out of the ring since their last fights. That is taken all together. So I'm not saying they haven't fought each in 9 years, but collectively. So some people will get that twisted and get it out of shape. But yeah, Charr out of the ring for over 3 years. Bryan over 2.5. Stiverne 2 years. Lovejoy, by the time the fight happens, a year and a month or so. So yeah, almost 9 years collectively out of the ring. So getting back to that purse bid from 2020, one was held, and this is pre-pandemic, $2 million bid by Don King. So he promotes Trevor Bryan. He's the one running this card. It's going to be happening, as you can see from this thing on screen, this bout sheet that sort of doubles as the press release, in South Florida. So this is an interesting case because they're almost made, and now we're going to have it. In January the 29th, actually, the WBA, when it sort of said, hey, we're going to have this fight, we're actually going to make this thing happen, said that January the 29th was the last possible day that this fight could actually happen. So seemingly the contracts, everything is in place. They've organised this for South Florida. It is going to happen. And if someone pulls out, they will lose their belt. The WBA made it explicitly clear, and it's what it issued online, a press release a few months ago. If someone didn't participate in this fight, losing a belt. If someone pulls out, losing a belt. So they are going to have this. Trevor Bryan, he will get $500,000 from the fight. Mahmoud Charr, he will get $1.5 million. That is if the former purse bid is carried forward, which the WBA said it would be. So yeah, I mean, when you consider there is no real demand from heavyweight fans to see this fight, there is going to be effectively limited or no fans in attendance, no major TV at this point. You'd have to imagine, that Don King's going to take an absolute bath on this one, unless he can somehow sort of convince or con someone to pick this up, multiple sort of licensing sort of arrangements around the world, which at short notice would seemingly be a bit optimistic. There was some talk in 2020 when the fight was sort of proposed at that point that Impact Network was going to be involved. Not sure what's happening this time, but obviously in due course, hopefully something happens. And hopefully there is some TV, or at least it's streamed online, because the last fight that Trevor Bryan had all the way back in mid-2018 when he won the interim title, it was a belt put on the line at the last minute against BJ Flores. No TV. Just had to rely on a couple of reporters who were at ringside to actually, tell us what actually happened in that fight. No footage that has been found, or if it has been floating around, it's been taken down because Don King and his production company or whatever, pretty vicious on that sort of stuff. So Manuel Charr, Mahmoud Charr, whatever we're calling him these days, he is the bigger of the two champions with the regular title. Trevor Bryan, who is the interim title holder. But for me, this is Trevor Bryan all day, every day. Mahmoud Charr, Manuel Charr, was just never really that good. He's been knocked out before a number of times. He's been knocked out by a cruiserweight before, Maurice Bradis. So he is going to get stopped in this one, and I think Trevor Bryan is just going to beat Mahmoud Charr up, because when he won the title, his title, which was also a vacant title, no one was calling for it to be on the line. That was against Alexander Ustinov. That was all the way back in November 2017, so over 3 years ago now. Wasn't a great fight, and he's never been that relevant. At the time of that fight, he may have been top 30-ish, but since then he's just been completely irrelevant, as has Trevor Bryan largely since his win over BJ Flores. So I guess in some ways, and I hope they're not going to build this as some sort of unification, because obviously they were paper titles, vacant titles, and no one called for them to be on the line, and now we have this fight that no one really wants. But I guess after all this time, with Charr especially, he's been looking for cash-out fights. We're going to get it. But I think Trevor Bryan is going to beat him up and take him out. Could be drop him a couple of times or even spark him out completely. But this one probably doesn't go the distance, and Bryan is going to win by KO. Charr is just not very good. The other fight. This is very interesting to me. It's not the co-main event at the moment. The co-main event is Bibit Shumanov versus Rafael Murphy. But Bermane Stiverne versus Christopher Lovejoy, which is also featuring on the card, 10 rounds. Very interesting to me, because Bermane Stiverne, even though he's 42 years old at this point, he was never that great, but obviously he had a place in the heavyweight division. Christopher Lovejoy has not proven he has a place in the division at this point. He's been knocking out cab drivers and street sweepers down in Mexico, and ahead of his what would have been a fight with Dave Allen, emerged this footage of one of his fights, because until then, there just really wasn't anything floating around. But this footage, which Tim Boxeo from Twitter, he shared on Twitter, someone had sent it to him. This is Lovejoy fighting, and based on what I've seen of this footage, I've watched it a number of times, Lovejoy has been padding his record out of Mexico, and I think we all knew he was doing that. This is what he was doing. He was trying to build up his record and then cash out. But unfortunately for him, he's probably not going to get the sort of cash out money that he would have expected. I mean, he's been talking about rolling for the $1 million fight and all this sort of stuff, fantasy stuff. And sure, Bermane Stiverne is no great shakes, but you have him, and we do actually have, from that fight from 2 years ago, Joe Joyce. Sure, Joyce beat him up over a number of rounds, but Stiverne still showed that he had some durability, and he also showed that he can go some rounds and land some of his own haymakers of his own. And he actually caught Joe Joyce a number of times. And when you consider Daniel Dubois versus Joe Joyce, and then you think back to February 2019, Stiverne versus Joe Joyce, even though Joyce fought differently, Stiverne probably had more success than Daniel Dubois. Stiverne landed a whole bunch of shots on Joyce. Didn't really buzz him to any effect, but he was, hitting him with some big shots. And the thing is, we just don't know how good Christopher Lovejoy is. And from, what we can see from that fight, this footage that has been playing, he looks pretty basic, pretty straight up and down, and I think he can be hit. And although Bermane Stiverne was maybe, lucky to, be a former WBC champion because he won a vacant title, I think that Stiverne, even at 42, if he can just manage to stay out of, harm's way, as we'll call it, if he can manage to not eat too many punches, I think he might just outlast Christopher Lovejoy, who I think will gas. He really hasn't been tested. He hasn't been pushed. He hasn't been taken more than 3 or 4 rounds, that sort of thing. Most of his work has been done in the first round or two. But I think Stiverne should be a favourite. And beating Christopher Lovejoy wouldn't make him relevant. It wouldn't mean too much. But it's an interesting matchup because I think some people have been, maybe drinking the Christopher Lovejoy Kool-Aid, thinking he actually might be able to do something. But I think this is kind of an appropriate test. Bermane Stiverne is a husk of a husk from what he used to be. We don't even know if Christopher Lovejoy is a husk. So Stiverne might be the husk of a husk, but he just might still have enough to deal with Christopher Lovejoy, who we just don't really know if he's any good at all. Sure, he might have a big punch, but after a couple of rounds, I could see him potentially, bearing in mind if he's, 300 plus pounds or whatever, he could end up blowing quite hard, and Stiverne might be able to sort of tee off on him. He was still managing to get a lot of shots away against Joe Joyce later in their fight, despite taking quite a bit of punishment. And sure, Bermane Stiverne, his chin, it has been in the past quite good. Obviously, Deontay Wilder wrecked him, took his soul, but I don't think Christopher Lovejoy's got that one-punch power like Deontay Wilder does. We saw a guy like Joyce who's that clubbing, hard, thudding shots, but not necessarily concussive. Maybe Lovejoy's more in that mold. But at 42, maybe Stiverne, he's been withering on the vine for another year or a couple of years since his last fight, since facing Joyce. Maybe that's just taken something else from him, even further from, maybe he's a husk of a husk of a husk now. But I make him a favourite because at least we know what we've got in Bermane Stiverne. Christopher Lovejoy, not so much. And even though he's been, in people, Dave Allen had said this publicly, that Christopher Lovejoy has been sort of grifting and really has been trying to making a living out of boxing without actually having to fight, and effectively he was a con man of sorts. If he's got anything about him, he should beat Bermane Stiverne. But if he doesn't, then we will know that he was all hype and no substance. But Stiverne, for me, the favourite, and I think Trevor Bryan is going to spark out Mahmoud Charr. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.